Welcome back for the Success for Life podcast. Another new episode. We've been flying through them. What a season it's been. This is Coach Schuman here, and I'm with my special guest today, covering a topic that's near and dear to my heart: leadership and helping managers, people in business, entrepreneurs really improve their performance from a leadership standpoint. Something that we all need help in, including myself, at every time and every turn. Welcome, Ramona, to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
I'm excited to talk to you. Tell everybody your background, where you come from, how you got into this as your expertise.
Yeah, so there's this saying where you have the greatest mess is where you have the greatest message, and that definitely sounds true to me. I was thrown into a leadership role for the first time as a new manager back. It's been, I want to say, about 12 years now. In a pretty male-dominated, high-performance, fast-paced environment. I worked in finance or private equity specifically. And I was asked to build up a team, lead my former peers, and grow that team without a whole lot of, if any, training or coaching and mentoring along the way. And I was keen and eager, and I was hardworking and felt like, yeah, I'm going to figure this out, and stepped into this challenge, which I thought was a great career opportunity. And I realized that this is harder than I thought. Leading people is a whole different ballgame than just executing well as an IC. And through my own journey and the struggles that I had during this time, which were less about the performance, which is why I think there wasn't a lot of intervention. It was really just me feeling stressed out, feeling frustrated, feeling like this was the hardest job, or hardest part of my job was to lead people, and that the easy, fun stuff was to do my own work, which I realized that as someone who wants to grow as a leader in my career, that's probably not the right setup. And I started then working with a coach and really dove into this topic in this field of leadership development, loved everything, soaked it up like a sponge, and realized how understanding what was going on for me and why I was feeling stressed and frustrated and why leading people was hard and what I needed to learn was about, the people skills and the leadership aspect, and not about the actual tactical thing or the profession that I was doing, or my team was doing during that time. And so really diving into it and learning and applying the information helped me, what I would say, change the trajectory of my career. Not only was I promoted and was able to take on bigger teams and more work, but I also loved that part of my job, to lead people. I really felt a whole lot of satisfaction coming from it, to the point where I thought, everyone needs this. We need to develop and train new managers from day one. I could have saved so many frustrating moments in that, during that time. I could have avoided so many mistakes if I had invested in this earlier and done the training and leadership development aspect of my work. And through this sort of my own experience, I helped implement coaching frameworks or coaching tools and mentoring in the organization, and ultimately created my own business now, doing this full time and helping hundreds of new managers and more experienced managers as well level up and getting that leadership development training in place.
Now, what's your educational background? Like, where did you go to school for? What was that?
Yeah, so I was born and raised in Switzerland. I went to school as a typical Swiss. I studied finance, and so I moved into consulting. I moved into banking, and then ended up in private equity for the biggest part of my career, corporate career.
That's really interesting. Now, Swiss are known for being finance managers, and it's something that has been in their forte, in their background. It's something that is an important aspect in their culture. Now, from a learning standpoint, from a finance standpoint, are they more focused on purely the financial part from a mathematical standpoint, how to make proper trades, investments, all those kind of things? And what aspect of learning from a management leadership standpoint is taught?
Yeah, I think it's probably changed too since then. But in the way the world that I grew up in was very performance oriented. So it was all about how much can you accomplish within the shortest time frame. Long working hours, a lot of focus on the output and the results. And I think that now, especially as I work in the Bay Area in San Francisco with a lot of startups, and this whole idea of people first, the conversations around diversity, equity, and inclusion, the idea of sort of compassionate, conscious leadership, all that wasn't really present back then. And it was very performance based. And that helped, that shaped me growing up, but also shaped me then in my first leadership career. And what I see now is definitely a bit of a shift. And even the organization that I used to work with, who's now a client of mine, they're gone through a tremendous shift in terms of what they're providing and how they're teaching leadership. And I think the same is probably true for many of the other top performing companies or financial institutions in Switzerland too.
How did you move from the aspect of being in corporate, being in finance, working for a hedge fund, leading a group in that capacity, and then moving into your own coaching aspect, working with corporations, and now essentially becoming the consultant to them, helping them lead their teams? What was that transition like?
I think that there was a time where I started to really, really get a lot of satisfaction out of helping others develop their leadership skills. And with I realized that the financial part, while intellectually stimulating, wasn't really making me feel good about what I was doing. I was so detached from actually seeing the impact on people. Yes, we were making money for pension plans, and so people would have a better future. And we could look at all kinds of indirect connections and how what we were doing was helping people, but it was miles away from actually seeing the impact in people. And now the work that I get to do is so immediate. Seeing what we're creating here is changing someone's life or changing someone's career in a positive way. And that to me was, that fuels my heart, fuels my spirit. So the transition was easy and it was interesting, still challenging in a very different way. But I'm beyond grateful to be able to do what I do today.
What are some of the core tenets that are critical that you believe managers need to be able to possess, some of the skill sets they need to possess in order to lead and work with people? Because there are many different management styles. There's a lot of managers that have an innate ability to lead, and then there's a lot that have to work at it. All can get to the same position of being able to lead effectively, but they have different levels of innate skills. Some have different educational backgrounds. What are some of the core tenets that you think are important for a manager to be able to lead others and lead individuals to be able to get the best performance?
Yeah. Just like you said, there isn't one way to lead. There are different manager styles. And I think when I do work with leaders, and I talk about this in my book, the book that recently came out that I wrote about leadership, growing as a leader and moving into leadership for the first time, I really focus on three main pillars. The first one is developing awareness. I think that when leaders have invest in developing their own self-awareness and knowing what's working for them and what isn't, and what maybe some strength that can be overdone, right? For example, for me, being too result focused can be helpful, but then it can be overdone and it becomes counterproductive or effective. And but that constantly investing time and effort into building and growing our self-awareness, but asking for feedback, reflecting on what's working and what isn't. That also includes then building awareness of the people around us. We can't lead a whole team the way that we would want to be led, right? So and I'm curious to hear your perspective on this as well, but I thought that, this is how I like to be led, therefore my team would like to be led that way too. Basic assumption, very wrong assumption. And once you hire people with diverse personalities, or right, you start to realize what works for one person does not work for another one. We see this as parents. I have 3 kids, very different personalities. I can't parent them all the same way. And in that understanding and starts with investing and being curious about how the different personalities, what works for them and what energizes them, what drains them, what are their strengths, what are the ways that their strength could be overdone, and really inquiring in conversations, watching them, reflecting on what they're doing and what they're saying is a critical part. So that's the first pillar. The second pillar to me is about developing your own principles. And I really believe that we have to lead in order to lead sort of authentically, right? But to lead in a way that makes us feel like leading is a fun part. It's a fulfilling part of our job. It starts with getting clear on how do we want to lead? What are the things that matter to us? And so developing your own leadership principle would be the second pillar. And then the third pillar that I talk about and think is really important in terms of leadership development is the leadership system. So A for awareness, P for principle, and S for system, the APS approach. This leadership system is all about the routines, the things that you keep doing over and over, like what we frequently talk about, just the one-on-one meeting, feedback conversations. It may include performance reviews. It may include career conversations. It may include the way that we lead and run meetings and what kind of meetings that we run, from scrum meetings or to daily stand-ups and all hands and whatever that may encompass. And what are all these routines that are visible to others that make up your leadership?
I find that really interesting. So awareness, first of all, I think is probably the biggest thing as far as the first step, right? Understanding what people's goals are, what their objectives are, what their strengths and weaknesses, what their abilities are, is an ongoing thing, and that's something that has to be understood from a leader standpoint. But it can be very difficult to get out of people what they need. So I'm curious, and I'll go through each one of those pillars. Hopefully, what are some of the tools a leader can use to be able to figure out? So there's some people that have a great feel for how someone might be and what motivates them, but then you have others that don't do a great job of communicating back to you. So what are some tools that leaders can use to find out where each person fits on that kind of spectrum of being able to customize their leadership?
Yeah. I think that a lot of it starts with just asking questions. We don't have a crystal ball. Like, we can't read other people's minds. Some of us have existing relationships with, or long lasting relationships with some employees, and we get to know them better over time. But especially when we're in a growing team or we have new hires on board, we don't know. And so we just got to ask questions. Hey, what's working for you? Tell me about a situation that was really challenging. What are typically personality types or behaviors that are hard for you to navigate? What inspires you the most? What motivates you the most? What are some pet peeves that I should know about? How do you like to communicate? What are you appreciating most about this job? Or what may be some things that you anticipate to be challenging? Why did you choose this company, this culture? What resonated with you the most? What are some concerns you might have? So there's a range of questions, but really being curious and spending the time to get to know that other person, I think, is critical. And then there are assessments that can be done, team assessments that you could do to better understand them. You could have them go through an assessment process. There's a tool called the user guide, which I think is really interesting to practice too, or to use it's part of a leadership system, that you write answer a set of questions about yourself, and you share that with your team. But then at the same token, it's a two-way conversation or a two-way relationship. You ask them to do the same and to answer the same questions, and then that gets shared. Those kind of things can really speed up that initial process of getting to know each other and understand each other's similarities and their differences, and then being able to tailor your relationship to meet how they need you the most, or how to be most effective with them.
Yeah, it's an art and a science, right? So that's what makes it a difficult process, that it's not just one thing. With respect to principles and establishing your own principles. So, for me, for example, someone that's accountable is important. Holding people accountable, whatever you're using from that standpoint.
Mm-hmm.
People that have a responsibility, that are selfless,
Mm-hmm.
even though they have their own selfish goals, they have to be selfish within the organization in order to get us to work towards a common goal. How does someone go about establishing their own guiding point from a principal standpoint?
Yeah. I think that it starts with what you just said. Like, I like the kind of people who do X, Y, Z. That just thinking about it and writing it down could be a very easy thing to start doing. What is it, the leaders in your organization that you admire the most? What do they do? And not just admire the most, but also that you want to imitate, you like, and that leadership style resonates with you. It's likely things that would make you feel good about yourself too as a leader if you were to embrace these kind of principles. I think accountability or integrity are really big ones. I want to be a leader who walks the talk. I want to be, whenever I commit to something or I set a deadline or I tell someone I'm going to follow up, I will follow up. I will, I will honor my word in that sense. Those are all principles that then help guide our behaviors or help us in decision making, or in situations where we have to make a decision. Am I going to do X or am I going to do Y? When we have those principles defined, that will create not just more certainty and confidence for us and for us as leaders, but also makes us a little bit more predictable, which is a good thing for those around us, those that we lead, because they realize that person is they have really strong principles, and I know what I can expect, and I can predict how they're going to respond. And even the leaders that we admire out there in the world are often the leaders that we could describe from the outside pretty well. We'd say this is that kind of leader who prioritizes these things, who values those kind of, whatever it may be. And reflecting back on what is it that you do. And reading books, for example, looking at statements or comments that are made that resonate with you, capturing those to develop over time, develop your own set of leadership principles or your leadership philosophy ultimately.
And incorporating all this into a system. So I've always struggled with this myself. Systems. I hate systems. There's some people, like my father loves systems. I hate systems, but it's something, and I'm an entrepreneur as you are. I like to have freedom to make decisions. What are things that people can do now in corporate? That's a little different. They're much more used to. Everybody has to have systems, but in corporate, there's probably already predefined systems coming in to the for the leader, whereas if you're on your own, you have your own business, you have to establish your own systems. What are some of the things that people can do, some simple things that they can do to establish systems in place?
Yeah, so I think and this is maybe where I see people struggle with the most is, as a leader, right? Part of your job description, although it's often not written down, it's often more implicit than explicit, is that you have to give feedback. Feedback is uncomfortable. So, and we also know that, so here we talk about constructive feedback, but we also know that recognition and praise is a huge driver to employee engagement, employee satisfaction. So knowing that, how can you ensure that with a recurring, consistent habits and routines, you are going to give constructive feedback and you're going to recognize your employees? If we leave it up to, sort of whenever it pops up, whenever it occurs to me that someone did a good job, or whenever I see that, and I am in the moment where sometimes it's, the shower moments, like, oh, I should probably recognize this person. Oh, I should probably give this person some feedback. Then we become reactive. And that's the thing that a system will prevent. We're looking at what are these patterns that I want to set in place in order to check the box on all the things that we know great leaders do. And you probably, in your book, you probably have some of these things that I could imagine that you'd recommend to leaders too, of what are the things that you want to recurringly do. Feedback and giving recognition is just one of them. Career conversations are one. The onboarding process and how do you onboard people is another one. There are frameworks on how to delegate that some people really leverage a lot and use. There are that, and then I already talked about the meetings. So taking a step back and saying, in order to run my team meetings well, here's what I think will work the best. You experiment with it, you iterate over time, but that becomes part of the system. And ultimately, we're looking for structures that they'll never stay the same because the world changes and you as a leader change, your team and responsibilities, all that changes. So it's an iterative process, but defining it and writing it down will provide so much confidence and clarity, again, for yourself and probably also for those around you, and to be able to be transparent with some of those routines, be transparent with some of those routines. And then, in a world where we frequently change jobs, you might 2 years later switch over to a different company. You're not starting from scratch. You already know this is what worked. And yes, granted, this is not a plug and play, but as a leader, here are the things that I will start off with. I will start off with this kind of onboarding process. This is the way my first 30 days in a leadership role. Here are the things that I identify as really important. Here are the things I will get to know that I will do to get to know my team. Here's how I will give feedback, how I ensure that I recognize and appreciate them. These are the tools that I like to use.
Yeah,
just capturing all of that.
Yeah, I think constant feedback is a critical thing. I think a critical thing is how you divvy out positive reinforcement and negative reinforcement, and when those things are used, and understanding where every person that works with you in the organization is in their life cycle with your organization. It's a big deal, and I've done it. I have to deal with it myself in my own organization. You have people that come on board that are perfect for your organization at one stage, and then another stage not good for your organization. Those are important things that have to be identified as you continue to grow. Those are things that a lot of leaders struggle with, and one of the things that I use as a great example in one of the most brilliant strokes of leadership that no one would ever have thought is, if you go the Civil War in the United States, when Abraham Lincoln fired General McClellan and brought in Ulysses S. Grant, and that was a huge moment in history, because that person that was in there as the original leader was the person that was the celebrated general, the person they thought should be the general, and he did nothing. He wouldn't move on the Southern troops. He wouldn't act. And then they brought in Ulysses S. Grant, who finished at probably the bottom of his West Point class, but he had ability to understand the objectives, and he had the ability to understand his people. People had dismissed him as a guy who drank too much and all those kinds of things, but what he was a brilliant field general. He had the ability to lead, understand his people, put himself on the line, and to back the people. And I think your thing about recognition is really important. It was one of the things that Grant did better than maybe almost every general in history, because being a general, there's a large amount of ego, right, in that role. So they understand that they have to get other and motivate other people, but a lot of times there's glory with it as well, and a lot of it goes to the leader's head in some cases, and McClellan's a good example of that. But Ulysses S. Grant becoming the general was a very humbling thing for him. So he always approached it from that aspect. So despite someone who was incredibly flawed and had a lot of flaws to him, that ability to be humble and to deal out recognition to the people who worked with him really bode well. It was one of the biggest strokes of leadership that Abraham Lincoln had, to be able to recognize that, to go against the grain and to choose someone that no one would have chosen other than Abraham Lincoln. He saw something in him. And it's an interesting thing that leaders do. Really good. I mean, that's an example of obviously fantastic leadership. But on a day-to-day basis, those are things that I think, with your system is really important that you can do every single day, because identifying the right people in your organization to be able to perform at a high level, the ones who, sometimes a great performer doesn't say that much. Sometimes he does. Being able to cut through all of that and to be able to figure that out is so, so critical. And a lot of leaders struggle with it. And I used to struggle with the person who had a personality like mine that was very outgoing. I would gravitate towards them, and a lot of times those weren't the right people for me as to work within my organization, because that didn't fit necessarily with my leadership style. And then you end up having a friend that you're working with instead of being able to have and having friends within your organization is fine, but it can undermine the leadership within your organization. So you have to be able to have those systems in place. I really think you put it really nicely. Tell me some examples that you have dealt with in your own practice where you've helped a group or organization really kind of improve their leadership and their performance and leadership.
Yeah, so I think that there's there's the awareness of what are we doing that's working and what are we doing that isn't working. I think some common themes that come up, especially for people who are new to leadership and transition from being a high performing individual contributor into that first leadership role. It comes with not just, which I think, by the way, is one of the biggest transition, if not the biggest career transition someone's making, because they're now not just adding that new responsibility, but they have to change their identity and their mindset in a pretty significant way in order to be successful as a leader. So, for example, I think, common themes that come up that I coach on and that I see people really change over the course of my programs or work together or overall in their leadership growth, their personal leadership growth is that they stop thinking they need to have all the answers. So I think very common for those high performing ICs is I got promoted, and some of them is also the messaging they get from the company is I got promoted because I am doing something really well. Like I am the person who has the strongest the highest level of expertise, or because they really like how I do what I do. So therefore, they're promoting me so that I can create or lead a team that then does what I do so well. So there's more of me, right? And that is actually not true. That will not create an effective team with people that feel valued and appreciated for their own strength and their personalities that they bring to the team. It's not leveraging their strength. And so that whole mindset shift of, what got promoted, but now what got me here is not what's going to get me there, right? The famous saying. And I'm not the one who has to have all the answers. I am also not the one who has to solve everyone's problems. And my way is not the way that everyone else needs to be doing it. And going through that transition to then figure out, okay, so with that in mind, how do I need to lead then? Because it's not going to be leading by problem solving and giving everyone answers and by enforcing my way of doing things, but instead it's about, being curious with understanding who am I dealing with, and then really calling on their strength. It's about asking more questions than just giving direction. Help encouraging others to not just own the problem, but also own the solution and figure out solutions themselves. So I'm not constantly being the person that they depend on, but they grow in their own journey. I am less of a superhero and more of a Yoda in the background. So shifting that mindset is a huge one. And I see people who go through this, who it frees up their time and makes their job a lot more fun and engaging because they feel less responsibility on their shoulder. They trust their team members more, and vice versa. So that's one. And I think another one that is really important is where I see a lot of people struggle is the lack of clarity on expectations. And so something that I see people really thrive and feel good about getting to is when they know exactly what's expected of them by their bosses, as well as they know that the people on their team know exactly what they're expecting of them. And I think I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this too. And I think that a lot of leadership problems or things that we have, people problems, maybe more so, stem from a lack of clarity on expectations. And I don't mean just a job description with, 20 bullet points on it, but really explicitly, what am I expecting? And turn some of the implicit expectations that we have, especially with remote and hybrid teams, how we're doing work, and turning them into explicit expectations, really putting it on the table, clarifying those things, and doing this over and over. It's part of the leadership system. You can't do it once and let it go. You have to keep having that conversation.
There's no doubt about it. One of the things that I think is very interesting when you promote people. You're familiar with the Peter Principle?
Yep. Yeah,
so
exactly.
Many times someone is wildly successful in one area and you think, okay, now I'm going to get the classic example is the fantastic salesperson that you make the sales manager. And really what he is or she is a fantastic salesperson. And that's where they should have stayed. That's where they thrived. And now they become a manager and they fail and you're looking to fire them when really what they should just be doing is selling. Right. So that's like the easy, simple example of it. But Peter Principle is, we all fail to the level of our expertise. So what we have as far as our skill level is, we have we rise to that level of failure. So meaning we get promoted until that's our cap for whatever reason. And I think one of the things that you do that's a great an important part is we want to be able to push through that cap, because otherwise the Peter Principle just falls right back on top of us, because every single person has some, there are some people that have, like we talked about, innate leadership, and they can rise really, really high without having to have all of these things in place. They may do it naturally. And there are others that need help with it. So every person can become a very good leader within their skill sets. But if they don't work on understanding what their flaws are and what things that, and where they need to round out. So if I become a sales manager and I've been a great salesperson my whole entire life, and now I'm in charge of sales, you better believe that I have to focus mostly on the techniques of selling and motivation, and the people who are doing the numbers, like what the numbers are every month and who made their numbers. Like, I have to have someone that's responsible for that, because ultimately what I care about, if I've been a great salesperson myself, is helping others be able to sell. And it's a great movie. Glenn Ross. Have you ever seen that movie?
No.
It's about I want to say 80s. I can't remember if it's 80s or 70s. So but it came out when I was a kid, so I didn't see it then. I saw it as an adult. But one of the interesting things about that movie is they're all the sales manager is a fantastic stock trader who now is in charge, and his only way of leading is to drive people to the brink. I mean, literally foot in butt and like go. And not everyone responds that way. And it's a he's the one that talks about A, B, C always be closing, right? Which obviously it's one of the first movies where they talk about that. And it was made famous in that. And he's ABC, you always should be closing. Well, the issue is that there are people that are older, that come from different backgrounds, and some of the stocks they're selling are not that great. It's he wants them to pump and dump and all those kind of things. So the issue lies in that this guy was a fantastic salesperson, and he's all about, hey, you should be reaching this and you should be reaching that. And he got that way by someone pushing him to the brink. But everybody else in the room was not that way. And it starts to fold on him as that becomes a process. But it was very enlightening, because that's and you've been in financial for a long time. You're in that area and you understand this. That is a lot of the way that you push in the trading sector, in the stock sector. At least traditionally, that's how it was, because those people get weeded out, right? It's just like the modern movie, the movie with Will Smith, when he it was a great movie where he had, I don't know if you saw it, but he had a child, and he was
Yeah.
you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, no, which one?
Yep. So he ends up taking the internship. He becomes wildly successful. He was self-motivated.
Yeah.
And he was someone that was self-motivated. He was an easy person to be able to get successful because he was motivated by a lot of intrinsic factors.
Yeah.
There are other people that are not motivated. So that's an example of a guy. Everybody wants that guy on their team once you see him work because he will do whatever it takes to succeed.
Mm-hmm.
There are other people that may have that ability and they just don't know how to go about it. And then
Mm-hmm.
there's some people that you do have to kick to the curb because they don't have that ability and another place in the organization may be better for them. And that's an
Mm-hmm.
important thing from a leadership standpoint. Where should the natural inclination is let's fire that person. But,
Yeah.
maybe someone's in sales who should be in marketing or
Yeah.
right? Someone's in sales who should be in operations. Someone's in operations who should be in sales, right?
Yep.
And the classic and you're over in San Francisco in the tech space is the engineer who's not that great of an engineer but understands the product. Well, maybe they should be selling the product and not trying to make them code when they're not as good as the other coders, right? Those are all
Totally.
yeah,
Totally. Or they should be leading the team
right.
and depend on
Right.
the engineers who are really good about, or, for doing the work, and they're managing the team. Yeah.
That's a great point. Maybe they should be leading the team.
Yeah.
It's all part of that process. This has been fantastic. Can you let everybody know where they can find out more about your book as well? I'd love to I'll read it if you wanted to send me a copy. I'm always willing to learn more. And where can everybody find you? How can they get a hold of you? How can they reach out to you?
Yeah. So I'm on LinkedIn, Ramona Shaw. My website is ramonashaw.com. And the book is available on Amazon. It's called The Confident and Competent New Manager: How to Rapidly Rise to Success in Your First Leadership Role.
Before I let you go, because I forgot about that part, the confidence area.
Yeah.
Motivating people and developing and building their confidence. What are some of the things that you've done? First of all, by the way, before I say this, I don't know if there's a lot of Ramona Shaws in the world, but that's really good that you got that URL. That's great. That's fantastic.
Yeah.
It seems it seems like that might be a tough one to get. It's fantastic that you got it. But confidence, it's that's always a tricky subject. How do you build people on your team's confidence?
Yeah, it's actually really interesting. I think there's confidence comes from understanding. If you look, there's different aspects of this, but to keep it sort of in a nutshell, there's the inner talk, the self-talk that we all have. And as managers, if you notice someone is having negative self-talk, to call it out and to mirror back what you as a leader see in them is actually a really impactful way to influence them and to help them build their confidence. To call out the things that they're good at, the achievements that they have, because people with low confidence will often explain away all their successes with luck or coincidence, or actually someone else set this up for me. They won't own it, or they're not paying attention to it. They're quick to look at the next problem or the next area that they're feeling. And so keep reiterating it. What are the wins? If I have someone in my coaching work that I know we're working on confidence. We're working on confidence. I will start off every conversation with, what are the things that you want to acknowledge yourself for? Or what are you proud of? What have you actually achieved since we last spoke that is noteworthy? And then people often go like, oh my gosh, yeah, I forgot. I actually did this and I also got that done. And just celebrating those wins is a way that you can do this as a leader for others, and then instilling the confidence in them, giving them challenges that they may be struggling a little bit with this, but they'll figure it out. They'll be resourceful, and to let them know, I know this is the next level for you, but I trust you. Like, I know you will be resourceful and you'll figure your way out. And if you make mistakes along the way, this is what we're trying to do here. You'll learn from them and you'll grow. And I know that this is something that's the right time for you to embark on this journey. And that confidence that we get, or that messaging that we get from someone who's our leader, tremendously impactful for people.
That is fantastic. You know what I really liked? Calling. I never thought about that before. Calling out when someone has negative self talk. It's your natural inclination to say no. Why don't feel that way? But to say it's better to say, why are you thinking like that?
Mm-hmm.
Because you've done this, and this. There's no what can we do to get you to think positively about the situation? That's as I coached football for 20 years. That's one of the things you deal with on a regular basis with teenagers. So but you deal with it in adults in a different way. In my company, for the last 20 of less years, adults execute that in a different way through jokes a lot of times. I've seen so many people execute through humor, negative self-talk,
Mm-hmm.
and it's I've always had a challenge with that as a leader. Like, how do I bring that to light without making them feel, that's part of their personality. Oh, when they can't do something, they make jokes of it, right? So,
Mm-hmm.
and that's a common defense mechanism that people have.
Mm-hmm.
If I can't do it, I'm gonna make a joke. I'm sure I've done it.
Yeah.
Everybody's probably done it, right? Because it makes you feel better. But I think it's really
Yeah.
really brilliant how you did, because I was curious how you handled confidence, and some of those things that you talked about there were really those are like nuggets of gold there, because that is always a difficult issue, I think, as a leader. First of all,
Mm-hmm.
some leaders struggle with their own confidence. There have been people that have been good leaders that struggle. I hate to always point out, like George Washington to me was always an example of almost like the quintessential leader, right? He was
Mm-hmm.
at the time he was strong. If you were to say what person you would want to invent a country, that, back in that times, obviously women didn't have the opportunities as much back then, but back in those days, that would be the person that you would say, okay, he's tall, he
Yeah.
exudes leadership, he's talks when he needs to. Everything he talks about is always important. But I always found that was so interesting that Abraham Lincoln became one of the greatest leaders of all time, because he struggled with so many things within himself, his own confidence in
Mm-hmm.
himself, failing over and over again, questioning himself. Even his own relationship and his marriage was always a
Mm-hmm.
battle, right? His wife had some mental illness issues. They also had a child, which really came from the fact that children died of theirs,
Mm-hmm.
which he struggled with, right? So he was melancholy at all times, which
Mm-hmm.
had to be difficult for people around him, his wife, his children, the other leaders. But yet he was able to kind of help others be confident, when it came to making decisions. And I find that so interesting how, and that's why I say leaders come from all different walks and shapes and sizes.
Yeah, yeah, totally. And I think a lot of this is, and we could talk for days probably on this, but this is about managing your mind. Because I
Right.
think the reason why Abraham Lincoln was able to do what he was able to do, despite the sort of the challenges that he had and he faced personally, was because he was managing his mind. He knew that, yeah, I got this, and yet I'm going to get up. Yes, I feel like this way, and yet I'm called to speak up. And um, so he didn't let that stuff hold him back. He accepted it as this is part of the package, and he has a purpose. He is here called to do something, and he has this like drive that kept coming up throughout his life, right? To step out of the comfort zone and go and do. And I think that managing your mind is a really, really important aspect for people who want to grow and expand. And if where confidence is holding them back, that is part of the journey. And like we said earlier, when we get to the Peter Principle, where we get to that level, if we don't work on ourselves, we're definitely going to be promoted to the level of incompetence naturally. So anytime when we look at, I want to grow my career and I have these ambitious goals, it cannot come by just
Mm.
doing what we've done in the past and keep doing that and just and to just keep working hard. It has to come with developing greater awareness, learning more skills, constantly reflecting on our leadership and thinking, what can I do differently? How can I broaden my toolkit so I learn not just how to lead when things go well, but I prepare for the times when things won't go well.
Yes, it's amazing, and I think in modern times it's so important because of social media, a lot of people get doubted directly, right? And they take those feedbacks to heart. But you think, and there's so many examples, right? Harriet Tubman, she had narcolepsy, yet she was helping slaves come across in a time period where, I mean, what she did was amazing. Frederick Douglass, Lincoln choosing him to be in his cabinet, and Frederick Douglass being able to rise up as when blacks had no ability to be able to rise up and be able to do that, and that's why I always say, like, the more you go ahead and try to seek out challenges that you can succeed. And I think you pointed out that so brilliantly. Okay. You don't want to take on the world right now, but you want to take on pieces of the world at a time, and then maybe you can take on the world eventually. And that's a really, I think it's a great lesson for everybody. I can't thank you enough for being on the show. I learned a ton.
Yeah, this is awesome. Thanks so
It's as
much
much
for the
for me as
conversation.
for everybody else.
And I got a history lesson too. I'm like, wait, what? I'm gonna watch this and take some notes.
Well, I love how you pointed out how he got himself up every day, and that's actually true. I've read a lot about him. And obviously, that's why I have kind of a good experience. I've read multiple books on him, and because I was always intrigued. But George Washington, I've read books on, but George Washington's life, as I read it, is like almost like, now he had challenges, everybody does, but he just had that gift, like he really had the gift, and he knew how to hone it in. He was smart. He had a lot of the tools that you needed. Lincoln really had to find the tools, and he had to figure it out. And his home life was just horrendous. And so it's a great lesson, no matter who you are, that like there are people that come from that realm, and then and I use it in sports all the time. Michael Jordan. I tell this to my son all the time. His sophomore year in high school, Michael Jordan didn't make the varsity team.
Exactly.
He became the greatest basketball player in my opinion, of all time.
Yeah.
Others may
I won't challenge you on that. But I think, if the work that we do, we see this constantly. There's maybe 1 in 10, if at all, who has the natural George Washington gift, if you want to call it. And 9 others, at least, don't. And so we could easily say, like, as a leader, this is just the way it goes. And we look for those natural talents. And I think especially when leaders come together and talk openly and vulnerably about the challenges that they're facing in leadership development programs, they realize, like, oh man, I'm not alone. This is hard stuff, and I'm not the only one who's dealing with this and this and that. And to really accept that that's part of it, and investing in it and leaning into it is the way to go.
Awesome.
Yeah, stuff. Thanks so much.
Thanks so much. I wish you the very best. Hopefully we'll get you on soon. I know you have a podcast as well. Make sure you take a listen. Go to RamonaShaw.com. Take a listen to her podcast, pick up her book, engage with her, and learn more about how to lead others and help them to be successful. This is exactly what the Success for Life podcast is all about. We cover a lot of different things, but this is what the original intent was. I can't thank you enough for being on today.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
All right.